Plascon, color your world.
I was 6 years old when I lost my father. There was a war, and as we were running away, most of us got separated from our parents. I went to Kampala and grew up in an orphanage. I did not think I could become a doctor. So the orphans and vulnerable children are actually the heart of what we do at Access. We currently have over 500 orphans and vulnerable children listed.
I lost my parents. I had no one to actually help me in my education. So when Access came in, they provide us with school fees, tuition, school materials.
We also have a nursing school, and we currently have over 216 nurses. Every year, our clinic is able to see over 7,200 patients. I believe that empowerment comes from having knowledge, but knowledge should also be translated into income. The Dream Girls program provides skills in making hair and tailoring that they are able to use to get unemployment in the community. And the community is really what we are about. Whenever I look at these young children, I see potential in them. I see doctors, I see teachers, I see politicians, leaders of tomorrow. Having grown up as an orphan, I feel like it is my role to come and make a difference in young people's lives, because you can never know what they are going to be tomorrow. Hello viewers, my name is Dr. Karyesubula Robert. I am the founding president of Access, which is the African Community Center for Social Sustainability, and I'm also a senior lecturer at Makerere University and the head of the Department of Physiology. I'm here to take you through my journey, which began way back in a small village called Nakaseke. I was born like any other child with the two parents in Nakaseke district. I was actually born from Nakaseke Hospital. But as you know, there was a war that broke out in Luwero, and at the age of about 6 years, I got separated from my parents. The war was quite tough, and it took me about 15 days to actually get to Kampala, where I found my auntie. My auntie actually had a two-roomed house. That two-roomed house housed about 10 people at a time. Of course, at that time, it was a very great privilege coming from the bushes and having had the long walk. It was a great relief when some of the bypassers actually who knew my aunt helped me to get where she was. But living with my aunt soon became very difficult, because at that time my aunt used to be a vendor. She used to sell milk and mandazi in Kawempe, at 5 miles of Kawempe. So of course I joined the other kids and I started working with my auntie through helping her to sell the mandazi and the milk, so that we could all be able to go to school. But as you know, the school fees at that time, I used to go at Jinja Karori Primary School. When I reached P3, it became too expensive for my auntie to be able to pay school fees, and I actually dropped out of school. When I dropped out of school, I continued to work with my auntie, but life became very difficult, because at times we'd go without eating food, and would actually end up eating posho and dodo or greens for the evening if our aunt was not able to raise the money to buy us other things to eat. But one day there was a pastor who came. This pastor was called Pastor Sentongo. While we were outside playing, he came. They were playing a guitar and preaching the gospel. Then he asked, "You kids, what are you doing here?" We told him we are playing. And then later on, he told us about a man called Jesus and invited us to his church. So I was one of those kids who actually visited his church. But after I visited his church, he took a special interest in me. And then he came and talked to my auntie. When he talked to my aunt told him that, these kids I'm staying with, their father died and they got separated from their mother. So the pastor told my aunt about an orphanage which was called Ambassadors of Hope. The Ambassadors of Hope, of course, was in Makerere Chikoni, and they had many children, but to get there was also very competitive at that time, because in the time of war, many children had actually lost their parents, so it wasn't obvious that every person could get there. So Pastor Sentong actually talked to the leaders of the Ambassadors of Hope, and actually me and the 3 of my brothers ended up being taken to the orphanage. I remember that time very well. It was such a beautiful time, because when we arrived at the orphanage, which we call home actually, the Makerere home, for the first time we are given shoes. I wore my first shoe for the first time. We are also given some trousers which we wore, and they were our own. For the first time we also got our own beds. So that was really a life-changing experience. And then these individuals actually were able to take us through the choir, and we went and toured in America, singing in different churches and actually raising funds that were able to look after other children in Uganda. Many of you know Atoto, so the African Children's Choir is actually one of those things that did that. So the Ambassadors of Hope was able to take me through school. I joined school. Actually, I was very fortunate because we went for the tour for 2 years when I was in P3. But when we came back, they actually took me to P7, and I sat my exams from Nakasero Primary School. I did quite well, and I went to Kyambogo College School up to O level, which I did very well, and actually went to Mwiri. After Mwiri, I was able to join Makerere University. Of course, that was very competitive because only 96 top students could enter the medical school. So I was very grateful to have been given that opportunity. Once I reached the medical school, things again were not easy. We had rich kids who were coming from Budo, Gayaza, and all those nice schools. But luckily, I studied very well and actually graduated with some distinctions, which were very important. After my graduation, I tried to figure out where I would make better contribution. And I actually chose to go back to Nakaseke, where I was born. While most of my friends chose to remain in Kampala, I went to Nakaseke Hospital. But while I was working at Nakaseke Hospital, there was this lady who kept coming to the hospital, falling sick all the time. So I took a special interest in her with my colleague called James, who was a clinical officer. We later went and visited her home, and we actually found that she had 1 acre piece of land, and she had migrated from Rwanda when she was running away from the genocide. Unfortunately, her husband died. We later learned that she actually died from HIV/AIDS, but had remained with a stepson who kept taunting this woman and trying to chase her off the land. To cut that long story short, I actually had to go to court to represent that lady in order for her to retain her land. That took a lot of time, but it was settled. But then the lady was quite poor. So I asked her, what would you want to do? And said, if you bought me an animal, I would be able to rear it and get more money. So we bought her a piglet. And in about 6-8 months, we went back and she had nine pigs. So we knew that something in the community should be done. So we later learned also that 2 of our 3 children also had HIV. And we tried to talk to the administration at the hospital, but because we are quite small and young, people would not take us seriously. So we decided to go to the community and actually start our own project, which was then called the Nakaseke Community Development Initiative. We began by helping this lady, and then we built a small clinic. Initially, we named that clinic the AIDS Clinic. And the people were not showing up. People with HIV were not showing up. So we went back to the elders of the community and they told us, you know what, you cannot name your clinic AIDS clinic when everyone does not want to identify with HIV. So we later decided to name this place the Life Care Center. And when we named it the Life Care Center, all members continued to come and we are able to support those people who actually had HIV. In those early 2002, there wasn't much you could do. It was basically treating opportunistic infections, watching people and counseling them as much as possible. So we did the same, but unfortunately, as we were helping people with HIV, the people kept dying. And so we were left with orphans and we did not know what to do with them. So initially, people would die and the orphans would be left there with no caretaker. So we started a project called the Memory Book. In this memory book, the person living with HIV would be prepared to die, and then they would tell us where they would want to live. The orphans would take care of them. Luckily, I got an opportunity to go out and present this concept. At that conference, there were also some other rich people who came. For them, their point of memory succession planning was about planning who is going to be the next leader when this CEO goes. So when I told them about the memory book, they got interested, and they actually later gave us a grant, which helped us to establish the organization now, which we call the African Community Center for Social Sustainability. So the African Community Center for Social Sustainability has grown over time. We now have been existing for 22 years, and we have been able to start a preschool which supports about 130 kids. These are vulnerable children who would actually have had nowhere to go. And then we support the orphans through all their level of education from primary 1 up to university. And we currently are supporting about 480 kids to go to school, different schools. We don't have an orphanage like I did. But inevitably, some of the children still drop along the way. They are not able to complete primary 7, or they are not able to complete S4, or they don't have money to continue. For such kids, we've set up a skilling program which enables them to acquire skills and they are able to go in the community. Along the same way, being doctors, of course, our best thing to do as founders was to start a clinic, but also working at Nakaseke, we set up a training program. This program was initially for nursing assistants. So we are training nursing assistants, but in 2006, the government changed the policy and said that we no longer want to train nursing assistants. You either train enrolled nurses or diploma nurses. I recall very well that we had around 120 young girls whom we are training. We asked the ministry to give us about 6 months so that these kids would graduate. Luckily, Dr. Diana, who was in charge of that, allowed us to do that. But then the community came back and said, but we are trying to help people in the rural areas. Most of the training facilities are in big towns, 80% of them, and the big health workers are all in big town. So the community decided that we set up a nursing school. I remember very well the day we set up to start the nursing school. We called on the community, we told them about how good the school was and the requirements of government, and the community responded very well. I remember people said, okay, let's organize a camp where we can sell things. The people brought their chicken, they brought their eggs, sugar cane, whatever have you, and we actually did a market. And in that market, we are able to raise 4 million shillings. When we raised that 4 million shillings, I actually knew that would actually set up that nursing school. And that began a foundation where we actually established the Access Nursing School, which is in Nakaseke, and has now trained over 470 nurses who work throughout Uganda, working in Southern Sudan and very many other parts of Uganda. So that is really the story of Access, which has grown. We have now also worked with government and have set up the first non-communicable disease clinics. We've set up 3 clinics, one in Nakaseke Hospital and one in Semto Health Center 4 and one at Access itself Life Care Center. you know that the burden of non-communicable diseases is quite high, and so this has to begin in the community. So we've trained community health workers who are actually able to go to the communities and identify those individuals who might be sick. They refer them to the hospitals, and these individuals are able to get free care through the support we have.
Tuli ku ground Plascon paint and win. Yes, yeah, Plascon paint and win. Ku ground. Chicho, buy paint worth 100k. Get a scratch card. SMS the code to 7197. Stand a chance to win instant airtime, 1 million shillings bully day there, or a share of a 3 million shillings jackpot each week. What do you want the brand new podas, tuk-tuks, and so much more? Catch the paint and win action every Monday on Bukede One, NBS, and Sanyuka TV. Plascon, color your world.
So really, what inspired me to start the African Community Center was actually the way I was brought up. As I've heard of my story, I actually was an orphan. I dropped out of school, and because of the African Children's Choir, Ray Barnett, Uncle Paul, and Mami Robina took me on together with my brothers, and they gave me a very good education. So this privilege to me was actually an opportunity for me to be able to make a difference in the community. But also, as an individual, I knew that God had given me potential, and my potential was being able to grasp concepts very fast. As I told you, I actually went to P7 and passed in first grade after skipping most of the classes. In the same way, I continue to perform well, and actually my life has been nothing short of miracle. When I went to Makerere, I graduated very well, worked in Nakaseke, but while I was working in Nakaseke, I also went to attend a conference in Kampala. They had organized the conference to train people in HIV/AIDS care. I found there two professors. One was Professor Kamia Moses, who is currently a professor of medicine at Makerere, and the other one was a gentleman who had come from the United States called Professor Majid Sadiq. After taking that 1 month training, both those professors told me that, Robert, you have a very special talent. Why don't you actually come back and study internal medicine? I initially hesitated because I was still earning a salary in Nakaseke, which was actually not very easy, because in Nakaseke, for me to get a place to work in government, I actually first volunteered for 2 years, not on payroll, but actually working very hard until interviews came and I joined the payroll. So I did not want to leave that payroll to go back for masters. But on the advice of these two professors, who were actually very professional, I actually went to Makerere. In fact, to tell you the truth, the first time I applied, they gave me a position, but when it came to time to study, I declined it. And then the second time, I also came back and tried to decline it, but the head of department, who was Professor Mayanja at that time, actually told me, Robert, if you don't come back this time, you'll never do internal medicine. But also when I was an intern doctor, I did my internship from Mbare Hospital. I was a very astute clinician. When I went to Mbare, maybe before I even say when I went to Mbare, when I was in medical school, they would give us allowances. So when they gave us those allowances, I saved most of my money. And my money was, I opened an account in my first year. When I was in first year of medical school, I opened it with the Bank of Baroda, and so I kept saving my money. So when it came to internship, when they took me to Masaka, I noted that I noted that there was a deficit of sutures. Sutures are what we use to sew people after doing surgery. So they also called stitches, I think, in the English word. So I noted that there was that gap. So I asked my sister, who was in Kampala, to be able to send me those sutures. So she would send me sutures. A box would contain 20, and then I would sell those sutures. I would buy them at 500 and sell those sutures at 2,000. I would give 500 to the nurse who helped me to sell, because the doctor would not pay those sutures, and then I would remain with 1,000. So, and in internship at that time, it was very good days. They would give us food, they would give us accommodation. We do a lot of work, but everything would be catered for. So I again saved my money for internship, as well as the money I saved from selling sutures. So when I went to Nakaseke to work, I had part of that money in the bank. It's actually, I remember I saved 5.6 million, and that was 2001. And I used that money to buy 17 acres of land where the Access program up to today is situated. So that's how I was able to fund that process. So as a lecturer in Makerere, joining Makerere was also another very difficult journey. And I think this story should inspire young people not to give up on their dreams. So after I finished medical school, I came back. Unfortunately, when I came for my master's, I sat for an interview. This interview was organized by the National Institute of Health, Fogarty, through Professor Sewankambo and Professor Mjenyi at the JCRC, the Joint Clinical Research Center. And we were about 40 candidates, and they were taking only 2 people. One for pediatrics, which is the study of children, and one for the adults called internal medicine. Fortunately, the young man from Nakaseke emerged the best candidate for that interview, and that's how my master's was paid for. So for me studying my internal medicine, which is 3 years, it was all paid for. My research was paid for by that Fogarty Award. So when I finished my master's of medicine, maybe before I tell you about my finishing of my master's, when I was in my 3rd year, the same professor that asked me to come back to study, Professor Majid Sadiq, actually came and did some medicine with us. He was a very strict professor. He would actually make us read like 6 journals, look at the latest information available, and then he would ask us to see the most difficult cases on the world. So basically we thought we are actually being very disturbed. So one time I mastered strength and asked Professor Sadiq, but why are you doing this? He said, if you want to be a good clinician, you have to put in the work. Then one time as I was working, Professor Sadiq asked me, Robert, what do you want to be? I thought about it, afraid to really tell him what I wanted to do, because really I wanted to be a kidney doctor, and Professor Sadiq was actually an infectious disease specialist. Most people would want to mentor people in their field. So I hesitantly told Professor Sadiq that, you know what, I want to be a kidney doctor. He said, don't worry. And then to cut that long story short, Professor Sadiq actually went and found another professor at Yale University in the USA, Professor Ashgar Rastega, and I worked with them with another doctor in Uganda called Dr. Sekasamv, and we got the International Society of Nephrology Scholarship. That scholarship is given to all people across the world, so you compete for it. So the first time I did not get it, but I did not give up. We applied again, and finally I went to Yale and I trained to be a kidney specialist. But the training at Yale was also not very easy, because Yale is among the top 5 universities in the US. When I reached there, the culture was different. The kids were very bright. So it was like I had to race through my mind all the time to catch up. And because of the cultural differences that came from Uganda, for instance, here we are told not to speak up. So I would keep quiet until again Professor Ashiga told me that, you know, Robert, this is America. You have to say what you know. And if you don't say it, we assume you don't know. And if you say it, you have to volunteer it. We are not going to ask you to tell us what you know. So from that time, as an introvert child, I changed and actually began to express myself. It is no wonder that after I left Yale, I left again with flying colors. I came back to Uganda and then had difficult fitting in. I had no formal position, and again I had to work for a long time. It was actually up to 4 years that I was working with Mulago, not as a formal employee, but being supported with things from other places. And this was not for lack of interest. I actually sat 6 interviews with the Ministry of Health as a qualified nephrologist, one of 3 in Uganda. But for some reason, I think whatever crept in, I never got the job. I only got lucky later on when Professor Sewankambo and Professor Kasolo, God rest her soul, actually talked to me and said, why are you struggling to join the Department of Medicine? You were a brilliant doctor. please come and join the Department of Physiology. Physiology deals with how the body functions, and so as a medical doctor and physician, it easily fits in. So I joined the Department of Physiology in Makerere, and ultimately actually now rose to the rim. I'm the head of Department of the Physiology at Makerere. But all these things show you that you have to persist, you have to be resilient. When you see opportunities, you have to take them with both hands. And many other things have happened. While at Makerere and teaching, there was another opportunity that came. That opportunity this time was for a PhD. They announced a PhD, and this PhD was actually in non-communicable diseases. And the person of contact was actually a white gentleman called Professor Newton. He was located at the Uganda Virus Institute. So I wrote him an email. When I wrote him an email, he responded and said, okay, so if you are interested, you could come and meet me. The next day, I took a taxi and I was at the UVRI. Right in the morning, I talked to him. I told him, you know, I'm Dr. Kalyesubula, I'm a trained nephrologist, but I would like to do a PhD because these PhDs are not offered at Makerere at all. He said, oh, young man, that's very interesting. Why don't we apply for this grant? So we applied for the grant, which was advertised at the London School, and we did not get it. I came back to Makerere and continued to work. But later on, about 3 months later, Professor Newton actually called me and told me there was an opportunity for me to be able to join them. I did as a coordinator of a study, but later with Professor Anatori of UVRI, they appointed me a principal investigator of a very big study that was looking how to measure kidney disease in Uganda, Malawi, and South Africa. So that's how we became the principal investigator of a £1 million grant, and that's the grant that actually paid for my PhD. But again, for my PhD, it wasn't easy because I did not get a study leave from Makerere. So I would have to work at Makerere 3 days and then work 2 days on the project. I remember very well because of jam, I used to take a boda to go to Busega because at 6:30 the taxi would be leaving, the van would be leaving to go to Masaka, and that van, when you missed it, you would miss it. So I would take that van, first do my work in the morning, take that van, and then I go to Masaka, I do my work over the 2 days. In the evening, I would ride back. Then when I would reach Busega, I would take a boda and then go and see a few patients and then get back home. But through that, I actually was able to complete the PhD. This PhD was part-time and had been given 7 years to complete it. But because of this hard work and the support from very good professors, Professor Rory Tomlinson and Professor Liam Smith, who is actually now the provost at the London School, I completed this PhD in 3.5 years. And that's how I became a super specialist with a PhD in management of non-communicable diseases. And this has actually brought a lot of other opportunities. So my appeal to government would be that they create systems that recognize talent and support it. Because if the system is not supportive, no individuals can surmount it. My story is exceptional because I had a lot of mentorship and support and the blessings of God, but many people would not make it through those troubles. So it's important that the systems support those individuals who have extra talents. And when it comes to the individuals, there's nothing fair in the world. So you have to work very hard for what you believe in and what you want. Be persistent, be consistent, be honest, don't lie, do your best, and once you do your best, a window will open, and once that window opens, no one will stop you. So you have to invest in yourself. You have to be an expert at something. And once you get those skills, don't use them only for yourself. Use them to benefit other community members. And once people see that, they will come and support you. I'm no longer working at Access. I'm in Makerere working, but the project is run by other individuals who are talented, and we are helping a lot of orphans and other vulnerable children. You imagine for a second that I dropped out in P3 would not have these super nephrologists. I didn't even tell you, recently I just got the award of the Fellowship of the Royal College of Physicians of London. This is the highest accolade for any clinician, and it's mainly given to the Britons. They only give about 30% to the outside world, and we are only 3 to represent Africa. So this is the kind of caliber that we have in Uganda, and we have to learn to promote our people. You can imagine if I'd dropped out of P3, would not have these things happening. So I'm very grateful to the mentorship that I've received since I was a child. My auntie, who actually brought me up, she died about 5 years ago, God bless her soul. And then the people of Ambassadors of Hope, Daddy Ray Barnett, he actually also passed away, Mami Robina, Uncle Paul, and then my teachers who have taken me through the education system, Professor Kamia, Professor Rory Tomlinson, those people I mentioned along, and more importantly, my family. My family has been very strong. I'm married to Esther Katari Karyesubula, and we have 3 beautiful children. Actually, the story of my children is also very important for you. You might actually take a lesson from it. So when I got a scholarship to go and study in the US, I got only to go alone. And it's after I'd married my wife. So I had to leave my wife in Uganda. But guess what? This opportunity came when my wife was actually pregnant. She was actually 6 months pregnant, and I had to leave her behind. So while I was studying at Yale, the time came for her to give birth, and I was not there. So that was very devastating. But then, fortunately, she gave birth to a bouncing baby boy, and I had a mixture of emotions of not being there, but also the joy of receiving a firstborn. But later on, of course, they were able to join me. But the sacrifices that we make to get what we want are actually very, very serious. I also want to thank the UBC team for having given me this opportunity to talk about my journey from childhood up to the level of where I am as a consultant nephrologist. Thank you very much. I also thank the listeners and the people who are viewers for watching this. For everyone who wants to contact me, you can actually contact me at mobile number 0704 442 700, and I'm very available to support all the people who are in their journey and want counseling or any medical support. And I want to thank God above all for having enabled me to become what I am for God and my country.